Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me as always, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, Andrew Malcolm at AH Malcolm on Twitter, not X, but Twitter.
Twitter, that's right. That's exactly right. How you doing? You have a good holiday?
I did. You know, I did a little grilling on the Solaire, and enjoyed that. And I had my mother over, and it was just three of us here with some nice Wagyu sirloins. And
how did the Solaire adapt from Minnesota weather to Texas weather?
Well, awesomely. That's fine. The only thing that's different is that when I lived in Minnesota, I had natural gas to the house, so I changed it so it was connected to natural gas, so I never had to worry about whether or not I had enough propane in the tank. But where I live, I don't have natural gas as an option, so I had to convert it back to propane when I got here. And so now I'm always kind of curious to just where am I at on this tank? I'm going to get myself a gauge. I finally decided to stop. I'm going to stop guessing at this. I got myself a gauge.
No, but you either pour cold or hot water on the tank, and it shows the level. It freezes on one level. I think
now you're telling me.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It would be. That's actually really. It's actually a really good thing. It's a $15 gauge. I just went ahead and got it just so I could.
$15 these days, Ed. It's $15.
Yeah, right. That's
it's $7 from a few years back.
It's 2010's $7 is what it is.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
I agree with you. All right. Well, I mean, we've got lots of stuff to discuss, I suppose. But I got to tell you, I was very moved by your piece about your father. And there's something about fathers and sons. There's just something about that relationship. And you're a beautiful writer, man. I gotta tell you, I don't know if we appreciate that as much as we actually should. That is an absolute gem of a column.
And thank you.
Very personal, and I'm glad that you shared that. And
that was open to us, not VIP. So
it is, yeah. So if you haven't read it yet, go over to redstate.com because it really is a beautiful column. I just wanted to say thanks for sharing that because
thank you very much. That's very nice to hear. There's no point in writing if you don't have readers. And 26 years on the New York Times, long time ago, but 26 years is 26 years. I never, ever, anywhere in the world saw anyone reading one of my stories, ever, outside my family. Never, ever. You'd think with whatever it is, 5,200 stories, that there might have been one time on a train or a plane where I would have seen, but no, nothing. So I'm always appreciative of online and the comments. Just real quick, Jennifer Van Laar, the managing editor at Red State, asked me. She said, "Well, you're the oldest one here. I'll bet you have a lot of memories." And I said, "Well, so far." She said, "Well, when you think of some that might make a post, write them up and we'll put them out just like a regular post." So I've done it, and I think 6 so far, and they've been very popular. Just, remembering how my dad got me off smoking. And
that was a good one, too.
Yeah. And then this last one about a discovery after he passed away of something he did. And I really appreciate you saying that I'm a good writer. That means a lot, comes right to the heart. Thank you for that. I enjoy writing those kinds of pieces where you can be evocative. I did that on the New York Times. And for one thing, on features on the New York Times. Well, for one thing, nobody else did it. I don't know if they were good, but it sure as heck stuck out on the New York Times. Anyway, it was fun. So thank you for that.
It's funny because I did read the one about smoking, and my father was a smoker. He actually quit when I was born, relapsed just a little bit because he was showing somebody how to roll a cigarette, and decided to smoke it. He relapsed a little bit, then quit again. But he did both times with cold turkey, right? And he was death on cigarettes after that. So I was smoking when I was a young adult, including during a period of time when I was actually living with the man and he never knew it. And he was over at my house, and this is a few years later, right? He's over at my house and we're cleaning some stuff out, and he sees this little box with some old cigarette lighters. Stuff, just threw them in there. And he pulls me aside and he says, and he says, your son doing something with these cigarette lighters? I said, no, those are mine. He looks at me and goes, what are you doing with cigarette lighters? Little big things, right?
Yeah.
I said, well, I used to use them when I was smoking. And I'd quit by this time, right? And he says, when were you smoking? I said, I don't know, about 8 years, So when we were living with me, I said, yeah, I just never smoked around the house, And I was maybe a pack a month smoker, right? Although it was tough to quit. It really was tough to put aside. And he says, well, why didn't you ever say anything to me? I said, because you would have lectured me. And he says, you're damn right I would have lectured.
Yeah. Well, my dad's approach was, I won't spoil it, but my dad's approach was more preventative, but in a very clever, fatherly way, and it worked like a charm. So
yeah, no, it's a great story. People really need to go over there and read that over at redstate.com. But I'm glad that they have you doing that because, again, these are really touching stories, funny stories in that case, and I think that people are really going to appreciate that insight that is coming from these columns. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that one's in the clear. The one about the latest one about your father is in the clear. So go over to redstate.com and read that. I want to talk to you about the other column that you wrote in the VIP section about ISIS. And Jim Garrity wrote something today too. I think we're talking on Tuesday. I think it was today or it was yesterday, where he said this is the second anniversary of Joe Biden insisting that we still had a lot of leverage over the Taliban.
Yeah,
I really appreciated your look at the ISIS folks, but all of them are coming back because the war wasn't over; we just left it.
Exactly right. It's like James Mattis used to say, well, the problem with war is the other side has a say.
Yes.
And there is an element of karma in ISIS coming back, and that is that they're coming back against the Taliban. So the 20 plus years of the Taliban being the insurgents, they're now faced with their own set of insurgents. And the only people who are suffering are poor Afghans, but it's not really a nation at all. It's a bunch of fiefdoms, and they're all fighting as usual. So it is grim. ISIS coming back, as there's no reason for us to go there, except ISIS and Taliban and others are potential to reorganize and do another 9/11, because that's the big recruiting thing, is that you can hit the great Satan if you come and join us and don't get killed.
Well, the Taliban has always had insurgencies, right? It was the Northern Alliance that was doing that. And these were all of the non-Pashtun tribes, which kind of united against the Pashtuns, who were the primary Taliban. Pashtun, first off, you have to kind of understand Afghanistan as it's not really a country as much as it is a tribal area that is surrounded by a line on a map, right? The Pashtuns are the plurality in Afghanistan, and I think they're close to being the plurality in Pakistan as well. These footprints overlap all the different boundaries. You got Tajiks, you got Uzbeks. I'm trying to think of the other ones that are there. I can't think of. There's some smaller tribes. So this is really tribal warfare, and it's been tribal warfare for probably centuries, right? Ever since Alexander the Great blew through there.
And he didn't tame them either.
No, exactly. That was. I guess it was sort of a a sort of a temporary thing. One of his more temporary victories was in Afghanistan, and they don't call it the graveyard of empires for nothing. And
exactly. And then the Sikhs had an empire, and they came in and they couldn't beat them. Then the British, and then the Russians. But we don't teach history anymore in the U.S., so we thought we could do it. It started as retribution, and I understand that after 9/11. But
yep.
Then we got into the mission creep and nation building, and it lasted too long.
So, and again, you're right about that. The nation building thing it's sort of the necessity. Once you push the Taliban out, you needed to make sure that the other people stuck around. We stuck around too long. We kind of thought that, well, if we can just build some infrastructure, we can eclipse the Taliban so they don't come back. And the problem is that they were fighting an insurgency, and America's not good at fighting long-range insurgencies.
No,
aren't. And
which is what Putin is counting on right now.
Yeah, except I think he overshot the mark on that one. That's not a long-range insurgency. That's simply a nation defending itself now.
Well, the long range is how long will the U.S. and the West support Ukraine? And Republicans are making noises that it's not worth it. I think it is, but I'm in a minority.
I agree with you, right? I mean, I'm not saying that Ukraine has the cleanest government ever, but Ukraine,
right. Okay.
Ukraine wasn't going to invade its neighbor. Yeah, again.
Yeah. Okay. So the American government, which is pure as the driven snow, with suspicious activity reports about its sitting president and a media that won't cover it. Millions coming in from China for who knows what, except a Chinese spy balloon didn't get shot down till its mission was over. I wrote a column. I got very angry when Obama was lecturing Hamid Karzai about how he had to fight against corruption. Chicago Paul lectures Afghan president about fighting corruption. Jeez, Pete, the chutzpah of Americans sometimes is nauseating.
Yes. Well, I agree. I mean, and I think that the issue here isn't whether or not Ukraine had a clean government. The issue is that you have somebody who's trying to do an imperial conquest at the expense of Ukraine, and it's a dangerous development that has to carry enough consequences so that other people don't try to do the same damn thing. That's really
that's right. Conquerors don't stop until they are stopped. And he did 2 provinces of Georgia back in 2008. Nobody did anything except sanctions that didn't matter. So he took over Crimea in 2014 when Obama was president and Biden was vice president. And then Trump came in, who was very unpredictable on these things, which is a good thing. And Putin didn't do anything. He didn't start organizing the Ukraine invasion until Trump was gone for 2 months. So there's a real sign there. And if he wins, if Putin wins in Ukraine, then the Baltic states, which he could claim was Russia originally, they'd be next. And then it's a NATO war, and we're in it. So we might as well do it by proxy. All it costs is gear.
Yeah, right. It's not costing American lives. The next time it might, because if he got a walkover in Ukraine, the next thing was going to be the Baltic states.
Yep, exactly.
And Moldova. Exactly. Well, maybe Moldova would have been the very next thing.
And we're getting a lot of intelligence. I mean, we're not being inactive; we're being passive. But we're getting a lot of stuff on Russian tactics. We're radio intelligence. That's what they downed our drone over the Black Sea in international airspace, and Biden didn't have anything to say about it. So we're getting a lot out of it. They brought Russian gear, captured and destroyed Russian gear back to the U.S. to various army installations to reverse engineer it. and figure out the best ways in case we ever face those things in combat. The best ways to do them in. And it was a rude awakening. I hope we're going to come up on this in terms of supplies. We've gotten, and so has NATO, we've gotten kind of lackadaisical about since the end of the Russian or the Soviet Union, lackadaisical about supplies and training, and I think this is a wake-up call. And we're getting low on some supplies because we're giving or selling them to Ukraine. Well, we need to gear up. And for instance, it takes 2 years. I don't know why, but it takes 2 years to gear up to make new Javelin missiles. So,
yeah, I mean, that should be something that should be sort of on a continuous thing. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And there are, what do you call them, subcontractors. So they have to gear up. So everybody has to gear up, and then they can make them. But they don't make that many a year. We've made a lot, and they were in storage, and now they're contributing to the recycled metal in Ukraine.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're doing their job.
Man, I bet you see those videos on YouTube or on the Ukrainians put out the videos. Of course, it's all positive for Ukraine, and the Russians are doing the same to themselves. But when you see those HIMARS and Javelins take out a tank, it's curtains.
Yeah, it's very interesting how poorly the Russian military is performing, and that's something that we also have had a chance to see. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that we have a national interest, we have a security interest in making sure that we don't allow imperial conquest to become the norm again. That to me is the overriding concern here, and I think that that's something that a lot of the debate tends to miss.
And if we're talking about corruption in Ukraine, then it's we got to talk about the Biden crime syndicate, who got the prosecutor ousted, who was on the board of Burisma. I mean, come on.
Right. I mean, we're not doing this because Ukraine got a cleaner government. It probably does, but we're not doing it because it has a cleaner government than Moscow.
That's right.
So, I mean, for those people who are saying that we should take Russia's side in this, if you think Ukraine's corrupt, take a look at the gangster government where the Moscow window flu has been a thing for, I don't know, the last decade.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. I mean, it's, he's a dangerous guy, and he's been getting more and more dangerous over the last 15 years, really, ever since the invasion of Georgia in 2008, which really should have made all the scales fall from everybody's eyes, but didn't. So yeah. But we're going to have a kind of a shorter show today, just because timing issues. But I just want to make sure that people go back to your post about ISIS and the Taliban
Thank you.
At redstate.com.
Read all you want. We'll write more.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing in Hot Air, by the way. I want to talk to you about something that I wrote this afternoon for Hot Air, because you and I talk about media bias, right? We've got plenty of examples of it. You've got plenty of experience with it. We've been writing about it for years and years and years. But a climate scientist wrote a really interesting, lengthy essay at the Free Press. Now, this is Barry Weiss's publication, the Free Press, about how he basically neutered his own paper in order to allow it to get published at Nature about climate change and wildfires. And what he wanted to write at Nature was, look, I mean, climate change impacts the intensity of wildfires. He sincerely believes that, but it's not even one of the top causes of that. The top cause of wildfires these days is usually human ignition, either accidental or intentional. 80% of wildfires are started by human ignition, which is a fact that he points out in his paper at the Free Press, but had to omit from the paper at Nature. It's also about how the refusal to put power lines underground in these areas is a large part of the problem. Bad forest management is a large part of the problem.
Oh, that's a huge problem. There are in Montana. There were like on federal forest lands. There were like 3 and 4 tons of fuel just sitting there because they weren't allowed to cut timber. And trees die. See, that's the problem.
Yes.
And they have a lifespan like we do. And when they die, they make more fuel. And when a fire gets going, I've been on those fires. I've been right behind them, and this is where on my mind, this is where the fables of dragons comes from. They are like dragons. They suck the air in from the back, preheat it, and shoot it out the front. All done by the fire when it has enough fuel. And you don't see trees, you light a piece of paper and it burns up the piece of paper. That doesn't happen in a forest fire. The tree is on fire. The next tree bursts into fire because it's so hot and it's so dry. It just goes like a Roman candle, whoosh. And the explosive whoosh of the tree sends limbs and boughs far away, and that spreads the fire. So, yeah, there's a lot of it is the management, or I should say the lack of management. Oh, you can't cut down a tree. Well, actually, you do. And they grow back. Guess what?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that's part of proper forest management, too. We used to know this. Right, yeah. We used to do culling and controlled burns, and we used to clear brush, and we don't.
Oh no, you can't do that, Ed. No, you can't do that. It makes smoke.
The larger point this guy is making is that this entire field has become corrupt because of a number of factors, and there's a couple of really interesting ones in his paper too. I mean, he really needs to be read all the way through. The guy's name is Patrick T. Brown. And he no longer works in academia. He's got a job at an NGO or some sort of nonprofit. He says it in the piece. He explains it in the piece. But he got out of the academia thing because that was part of the problem. One issue here, which I found really interesting, was that he says part of the problem is that there are way too many PhDs coming out now, which means that there's a lot more competition, and that means that the gatekeepers of, personnel management and academia have a lot more power to decide, who's going to have a career and who's not. And so it makes it even more incumbent on these people to sort of kiss up to the current establishment. So they don't write papers anymore that contradict the current establishment, because if they do, they'll never have a career. They might not even get their doctorates, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's part of the issue. Part of the issue is that there's only a couple of these platforms, Nature and Science being a couple of them, that will even publish this stuff. And if you want it published, prominently in order to further your career, you're going to have to write what they want to publish. So these doctorates are writing to their agenda, not. And he lays all this stuff out. He talks about how this is, how it's turning this into a field of hysterics rather than, producing, some actual practical mitigating policies. And he says,
this is freepress.com.
Is it? I think it's the fp.com. Is the URL, and I'll double check that, but I think it's the fp.com. Let me just double check that. Yeah, the THEFP.com, the fp.com. And this may be somewhat behind a paywall, but if you get a chance, you really should read it all the way through, because there's other things in there that he talks about, which is, for instance, that it's an absolute falsehood that human deaths are going up because of heat or because of storms. It's a falsehood that this is negatively impacting crop yields. Crop yields have been increasing all through the global warming, epoch or era, if you will. And they have data. He's got the data to show that, but they don't want people talking about that because then it means that you can actually mitigate the impact of climate, of warming. So, yeah. I pointed out to you because you and I talk about media bias all the time.
All the time. Yeah, exactly. And so it's academic media bias.
Yeah, it's a confluence of it. Unfortunately, we're probably going to have to leave it there for today because, again, I'm sort of on a tight schedule trying to get a number of things done in the afternoon here. But I know you don't have a joke of the day, but I've got a couple for you. And I think that that's only fair because you've brought the jokes for years and years here. And I think it's time for me to
that's true, Ed. I'm going to knock off here. You tell some jokes.
There you go. You're going to gold brick here for just a second while I tell you a couple jokes. All right. Joke number one. And both of these are from jokesoftheday.net. First one is, my girlfriend dressed up as a policewoman told me I was under arrest for suspicion of being good in bed. After 2 minutes, all charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. All right.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
The final joke here. After waiting for more than an hour and a half for her date, Melissa decided she'd been stood up. She changed from her best dinner dress to her pajamas and slippers, fixed herself a snack, and resigned herself to an evening of television. No sooner had she flopped down in front of the TV than her doorbell rang, and there stood her date. He took one look at her and said, "I'm 2 hours late. You're still not ready?"
Yeah,
I will be paying for that joke later. I assure you, when my wife hears this podcast, I will be paying for that joke here, but it was worth it. It was worth it.
Yeah. That is a good one. That's a good one.
All right. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad. Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the regent of redstate.com. Find him on Twitter, not X, on Twitter at AHMalcolm or over at redstate.com.
You bet. Thank you, Edward. See you next week, everybody.
See you next week.